Welcome to Bigfoot
and the Bunny.
This is a couple's journey into the mysterious,
the unknown, and the paranormal.
I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I'm your host, Kristen Johnson.
Together we are Bigfoot and the Bunny. Welcome to Bigfoot and the Bunny. I'm your host, Chris Carr.
I'm Kristen Johnson, as usual.
Happy Serious Saturday.
Yes.
As opposed to our Thirsty Thursday.
Sometimes.
That we've been thinking about lately. Well, people do wonder. They say, well, what is the difference between Bigfoot and the Bunny and Dark Horse Paranormal?
I have no idea.
We're slowly kind of deviating those things with topic-wise, mostly. But we hope you guys are doing good. And we're going to do a quick introduction I'll tell you about in a moment. I don't know if you guys have seen these things. I come across them on YouTube from time to time and getting caught in the algorithm where you get the Google map coordinates and you can go and see interesting stuff. And we've got a couple of those, but I'm just going to share one today that we liked. And Joanne Stewart says, I wrote that on my wall and I'm thirsty and a butt'll help. Heck yeah, Will.
Yeah.
But I've got some Google map coordinates. Just put them in all the chats in case you watch this later.
How are you going to do that one?
That is not
6 pages over here.
That is not it. Okay. So, I got to adjust it. Copy too much. Here we go. So if you go to these coordinates and you just go to Google Maps on your computer or your phone, you got to kind of like clink around to get to a street view. I noticed because it's out in the lake, but you will see something pretty interesting. So let me bring this up. Add that. It's our cryptid. It's one of many of Russia's Loch Ness monsters. Interestingly enough, see, it kind of looks like that when you go to Google Maps, but when you get out on the lake, you can get off. Well, so you got to get off to the side. You'll see this, and then you can kind of zoom in and look. There's a Nessie.
Yeah.
Now you can tell by the lighting and the way, if you look at the shadows and the way they're working around here, you can see the shadows, the sun position. This debunks it and proves it to not be true, which is unfortunate. But I don't know how the hell it got there.
Nope. Supposedly it was snapped on Google Earth, and there it is. There's your coordinates.
It's in your Google Maps. And pretty interesting. It's a lake in Russia. Don't ask me to pronounce it.
You did well earlier.
I tried. All right, I'll give it a shot. Kaya Lazamugi. No, I screwed it up. I had it better before. There's like some birds over here watching the Nessie. So that's kind of cool. It's a little fun, right? Check the coordinates I put in the chat if you're interested.
You can find some interesting stuff, on Google Maps.
Hey, Brenda. Hey, Debbie. Thanks for joining. Thanks for everybody out there watching. We really appreciate it, guys. Let me pull this out now. All right. Let's get to business, huh? What do you say, Kristen?
My computer is shutting down by itself. That's what I'm saying.
The old computer problems.
Bastard.
You know why? It's not plugged in.
That doesn't help. But that's what I have to say.
We're so techie here. Yeah. You would think, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's bring on our guest, and you get your chats up and you can converse with people. Our guest today is Robert Bosnak. He discusses alchemy as a product from the last period in Western intellectual history when the search of knowledge centered around experience. And he explores how alchemy is about the way we experience matter, as in appears to us. When we ask a question like, what is the matter? We're actually asking an alchemical question. We ask about your matters of experience, the matters at hand. These days, there is a lot the matter. Certainly don't have to tell you guys that.
Yes.
The kind of cataclysmic events that have been going on lately, and things like our pandemic, earthquakes, volcanoes, etc. Most of the likes of which we have not experienced before. But Robert will tell us more about this. We're going to bring. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Hi there.
There we go.
Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon. Now I think you're on the West Coast, right?
I'm on the West Coast, so
Yeah,
thanks for
so it's
having me
even
on. Yeah.
earlier there. I was getting up out of bed about 1 o'clock today.
Sorry, we were up wicked early.
No, I'm just kidding, but some days I am.
Mhm.
How are you doing? We're very interested in the subject of alchemy. I know you've written a number of books, both fiction and nonfiction,
Yes.
that kind of center around
Yes.
like what?
I have just published 4 novels. They are about alchemy. They are called Red Sulfur. Now, Red Sulfur is it's also called the Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stones. Many people know it from Harry Potter. It is the source of all creativity. And the story is about the last alchemist who is in possession of it and about his relationships and how he's being chased by everybody who wants to get possession of this last of the red sulfur. So that is what the book is about, and um, it's very romantic, and it's also a history of alchemy, and it is about a period when science began and alchemy ended in the 17th century.
I love books like that.
Mhm.
Books that incorporate, maybe it's a fictional story, but you're getting all this other history that's
Yes.
true within it. And I'm not trying to compare them exactly, but it's the same idea where you learn something by reading the book, yet enjoy this fantastic story.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah,
I was interested in trying to convey alchemy to people because alchemy has been very important to me. I've studied it now for 50 years, and it's been crucial in my understanding of myself and of the world, and also in that very important period of the 17th century when science began. And I'm very interested in science and how it began. I'm also interested in what preceded science, when we were still knowing by way of participating in it. Science looks at the world by separating ourselves from it and looking at it. And alchemy looks at it by participating in the metals. So all the metals were seen to be sentient. Metals were seen to be alive. And so it's a communication between the alchemist and the material.
Mm-hmm.
And so
No, it's
and
fascinating. Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry, you
and
froze a little.
so yeah, yeah. And so what happened in the 17th century is that the greatest scientists of that time, like Isaac Newton, who created physics, and Robert Boyle, who is the father of chemistry, they were alchemists. And so there was a time where alchemy and science were going together. And that was this very interesting period of the 17th century. And there were wars going on about if science could continue. And uh, because science was held back by the church didn't want it to develop. And then there was a war fought, and there was a war fought between basically in that time the Netherlands and England and France, Louis the 14th that wanted to keep the power of the
Okay.
church. And so all that comes into the book, and how these people were living and what they were eating and what they were smelling and how they were loving and how they were hating, and all that kind of stuff comes into that context.
The experience, which must have been very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, when you say in your the intro that we provided, we were talking about experiences with matter, and what's the matter? A materialistic version of science, or did things change?
Yes, things changed dramatically. Things changed in the middle of the 17th century. Um, what happened was that the way that the alchemists would be working with the metals, um, every metal was seen as a seed of a planet. Um, And so there was the seed of Mars that was iron, and the seed of Venus that was copper. And so, because the planets, that comes from the Greek word planetos, and the planet is the English translation of the word planet is wanderer. So there were these wanderers in the sky that were wandering through the sky and that were existing between us who are living in a world of mortality and the firmament, which was the immortal, the eternity. And in between were the planetos. In between were these grand. Pardon? Can you hear me?
I
Hello?
can. Periodically, your screen is freezing on your side.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah.
sure if you get too many windows open or
Yeah,
something might be your internet. Those internet gators, they're out there.
yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you talking, but it does freeze occasionally.
Yeah, you freeze occasionally too, so I don't know what that is, if that's on my end or your end. But anyway, so maybe it is some kind of a demon that is coming in, because what I'm talking about is the way that there is this in-between world, of the planets, and all these planets have their own uh, qualities. And so the way that the alchemist was communicating with the materials was a way that they were communicating with these qualities. So when they were working on copper, they were working on love. When they were working on gold, they were working on the sun and the power of the sun. And they had this notion that everything that in the metals, and especially in the lower metals like lead, which was the metal of Saturn, in the metals there was a desire to become gold. And what the alchemists were trying to do is they were trying to enhance the desire of the metals to become gold, and not just the metals becoming gold, but that there is a desire for healing in the human body, and that they were trying to enhance the desire for healing in the body as they were enhancing the desire in the metals to become gold.
And these folks were also like physicians and
Yes.
scientists, and they pretty much encapsulated a lot of the major jobs of today all in one, because
Yes, they were very much physicians.
it was all kind
And
of
so,
turned lead into gold, which is probably how most people know about alchemy.
because what they see is that lead is a sick metal. So as they were trying to heal lead, it would become gold. And the sick metal is something that in itself desires to be healed. So that's why the alchemists were also physicians. They tried to find medicine to heal human bodies, but at the same time, they were trying to heal the bodies that were metallic. So the mineral bodies and the human bodies, they were all alive. So the world around the alchemist is alive. Everything is alive. And so they communicated with a living world. So it is not a communication that we now have in science between subject and object. It was a communication between subjects where the metal was a subject, just like the alchemist was a subject, and they had communication together. Is this still coming through?
I see. Yeah, you are coming through, and actually we're being told by our audience that it's us freezing out there. So what I'm going to do, and if it's okay, maybe you can just tell us, our audience, a little bit more about the basics of alchemy. I'm going to try dropping out of the studio while leaving this running and rejoin and see if it helps. Because from our perspective, you keep freezing, and apparently we're freezing on you, and we don't want to create a problem. So is that okay? Maybe just maybe the basic tenets of
Okay. So
of alchemy, and I'm just going to pull myself off the screen. I'll be
good. Okay, good. So let me tell you about alchemy. So the notion of alchemy is that that the metals, and they are bodies. They always talk about them as corpus. The metals would go through transformations. And so they are talking about the transformation process of the metals, and they use colors. So they say it begins in green, like springtime. And for alchemists, green was very much copper oxide. And they would start working on that green, which is the green of innocence. And then it would turn black, which is called the nigredo, the blackening. And it would turn black like the black of night. And as it turned black, it would start falling apart. So the notion was that the old world, your old world had to fall apart for something new to come into being. And that falling apart was seen to, that was called nigredo. And this falling apart then would get you into a really depressed state, a state of melancholy. And then alchemy describes how you move out of that state of melancholy. So it's very important for us today because it's a description of how to deal, for instance, with depression. And a lot of people are depressed, especially in this COVID era. And so alchemy tells us how to deal with that depression by moving out of depression, which the notion of depression we know from I'm a psychoanalyst, so I would use psychological terms. It is the sense that you can't get out of bed in the morning. You can't. The feeling of you're just falling apart. Everything is falling apart. Your whole life is falling apart. Now that is seen as called nigredo, and then this sense of I can't moves into a feeling of the blues. And the blues is the sense of getting lost and feeling what you have lost. And so that's why I'm saying alchemy is very useful for these days now as we are coming out of this depression of the lockdowns, this depression of COVID. Therefore, we can use alchemy very much in day-to-day understanding of how to deal with it. So that's just a beginning opening of how alchemy can be useful today.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yes,
Right.
I'm going to ask you just to ignore us when we freeze.
Okay, you're still freezing.
And keep talking because we're not freezing for our audience who confirmed it. Well, we are a little bit, but it's not so important if we freeze because we really want to hear from you anyway.
Just keep on going.
Just keep going. If you see us freeze up, just keep talking. Absolutely. Because you're coming through loud and clear, and it's actually us on our end. And I don't want to interrupt our broadcast anymore. No, that is so fascinating. And there are like crazy things going on in the world. Obviously, you have the pandemic, and that has led to all kinds of depression and people being in and all kinds of that. And other kind of cataclysmic events happening out there as well. Volcanoes going off rather suddenly. Earthquakes seem to be picking up in different regions
everywhere that some places never even had them before.
Right, right.
Yes, I think that we're definitely in a time of change and in a time of transformation and transmutation. So therefore, alchemy becomes a very important thing to study because alchemy studies how transmutation happens. And that we can deal with this transmutation by focusing on it and becoming more refined in the way that we're dealing with it, because alchemy is all about refinement, about becoming more subtle. It's not so much about the notion of growing, it's becoming increasingly subtle and refined so that you can deal with the world in a much more fluid way. And you can become much more adaptable to all these changes that are going on. And that's what I teach. I teach alchemy about how to go through change. And I'm very interested in how people go through change and going through change in a positive way. And that's what I'm mostly interested in.
Right, and healing people. Now, colors play a large role in alchemy. Could you tell us a little bit about the colors?
Yes. So I spoke about the colors from green to black, and that then the black was the falling apart. I spoke about that while you were absent. And then I was saying that then you get into the sense of loss into the sense of loss, which is called the blues. And so you get into that state of the sadness after everything has fallen apart. You begin to feel how much you've lost. And then the sense is that alchemy starts talking about that you then begin to get to the spark, because the notion of alchemy is different from science. In science, the core of all atoms is energy, right? That is Einstein, that is E is mc square, that the core of everything is energy, enormous amounts of energy in the nucleus. The alchemist, also many alchemists were atomists, they all also believed in atoms, but they saw that at the core of each atom is creativity. So that if you would get to the core of things, if you would get to the core of your life, to the center of your life, you would discover a new form of creativity that would start emerging and that would have a healing effect. And that they called heaven, that is light blue. And then out of that would come what they would say, if this transmutation process would be seen as linear, out of that would come the ability to reflect. You begin to reflect on what sparks you in your life. You begin to feel the spark in your life and you begin to reflect about it, and that is silver. And then in silver, you begin to be able to see two sides of things, because you're not only seeing um, this side on the physical end of the mirror, but you also see the mirror image. So you become aware of the importance of the imagery, of the power of the imagery, of the power of the symbolic. And that is called silver. And once you become really aware of that, that begins to ferment into your body. And that is called yellow. The fermentation is yellow. It begins to ferment throughout your body. And as that fermentation process is coming up, so the spark is beginning to ferment the body through reflection, as that is coming up, then what happens is a new transformation begins to happen, a new sunrise begins to happen, a new way of moving into the world begins to happen, which is called gold or red. And that is a movement into the world where the new spark that has come after the old world has fallen apart and the new world has come into being, how that new spark can come into life. And that is very important for us now, because we have to see, how does the spark of our aliveness come into the world now?
Because like the gold is kind of in a metaphorical sense, so we're not talking about like a physical gold. We're
Well,
talking
the alchemist, yeah,
mental
the
state.
alchemists always differentiate between the vulgar gold and our gold, the philosophical gold. Um, the um, the the vulgar gold is like the gold that we see every day, the gold that your rings are made of. Um, that gold is not the gold of alchemy. They use that gold to extract from it the transformation force, because they say the transformation force is in all the metals, but it's most perfected in gold. But when they say our gold or the philosopher's gold, that is the very concentrated ability, creative ability that we have to change the world. So the more we concentrate this creative ability, the more sparks of the world that we gather, the more that we concentrate it and move it into the world, the more we can change the world. And that is really important, because if the world is in the condition that it's in, the ability that we have to change the world becomes increasingly important. And that's why I think alchemy really matters.
Right. And I think you're talking about like a manifestation.
A
You know,
manifestation. It's a manifestation of
being
the spark
health.
that exists in all things. Yes. And that manifestation is something that we can help along. Because the alchemists thought that the divine force had left the world incomplete. And it was the task of the alchemists, so it's the human task, to um, bring completion to the world. So it is not, we're not just receiving the world and then passing it along. We are receiving the world and we are trying to make it a little bit better. That is alchemy. And so I think that that's a very important notion.
to start enacting alchemy in their lives and bringing
Yes,
about change.
yes, and so you can see in my novels, you can read how this alchemist would bring change to the world. It affected the way that there are basically three main characters. The one main character is the alchemist. His name is Mundanus, and he has received the last of the red sulfur, the last of this creative force, the last of this creative spirit. He has received that, and he has to pass it along for the next generations because it has to be passed along in his bloodline. And he falls in love with a woman who cannot have children. And she says, "My daughter will have our children for us." So then there is this crazy triangle that comes into being between the alchemist, the mother, and the daughter, and their children. And so it is mayhem, romantic mayhem that starts happening, especially when the daughter finds that the alchemist is still in love with her mother. It's not literally her mother, it's the woman, her aunt, who brought her up as a daughter. And so and then during the process, it becomes clear that this whole process is steered by red sulfur, that red sulfur is alive, because the notion of alchemy is that that these forces are alive. So the philosopher's stone is alive, and the basic story is of the novels that red sulfur, that the philosopher's stone wants to become human, and wants to become human through these two women. And through these two women, are twins are born, and these twins are like red sulfur, eternal. So they are immortal. And so then you get a story that begins to unfold very much along the lines of Marvel Comics and the superheroes, but it remains alchemy. So I try to draw people into alchemy by way of the fiction, because I think alchemy is so important.
That's awesome. That's incredible. I love that story, though. So good. Is that in your book that you wrote?
That is in the 4 books. So it is
4 books.
basically at the moment. It's Red Sulfur. It's 4 books. It is at Amazon, and I'm trying to bring the importance of alchemy to the surface through this highly romantic, very exciting story, where you also learn about what it was like when science was born. Because many people think about that science just came into being. There was an incredible resistance against science. Galileo, who was the word scientist, the word scientist meant that you were a follower of Galileo. And so Galileo was locked up by the church because he used technology to prove that the earth was going around the sun. And the church was very much saying, no, no way. The earth is the center. We are the center of things. And so, see, what I am very interested in diversity, but I'm also very interested in commonality, what we have in common. And what we have in common, everybody who's listening to this, what everybody has in common that is listening to this, is that we are using technology. And so the history of technology is our history. And so I'm very interested to describe that history of technology, where it came from, the alchemy that it came from, because technology is what we all use, and that's what we all have in common. And it changed the world more than anything else, and it changed the world for the good and for the bad, because technology also created global warming and the climate crisis. So it is what we have in common. So that's why I'm interested in it.
That's wonderful. Now, I know Galileo. How do you say it? Galileo
Galileo Galilei. That's his full name. He was Galileo, the son of Galileo. So it's Galileo Galilei.
Galilei. He was burnt at the stake too, wasn't he? After they locked him.
No. He was under house arrest. He was under house arrest for the rest of his life. The one who was burned on the stake, his name was Giordano Bruno. And Giordano Bruno said, there is not just one center to the cosmos. There are many centers to the cosmos. So Giordano Bruno was very much a 21st century man. So therefore I say, if we would go back to the 17th, especially the 16th century, and we would say what we believe, we would all be burnt at the stake.
Yes, most definitely.
Yeah,
Indeed.
absolutely. Yeah.
Indeed.
I think you're muted.
I am.
Okay.
That's indeed true. And it's interesting now, even with the advent of a materialistic science and a materialist versus comes some newer philosophies or trying to open up new doors. We kind of get stuck in our ways even today.
Well, the main change that happened was that in I'm talking about conventional science now. I'm not talking about the supernatural or anything, but I'm just talking about
Mhm.
science. In the 17th century, what began was the notion that we could study the world as it existed outside of us. Before that, we were always part of the world, and everything that we studied was part of us, and so we were studying our experience of the world. But then Descartes said, no, we don't study our experience of the world. We just take all experience out, and we are going to start to study the world as it exists outside of us. And then that worked really well till about 1907, I would say, around that time, when quantum physics came along and when it became clear that you cannot study the world outside of us because we are part of the experiment. And so that was a huge change in science, that we are part of the measurement, that you cannot measure. When you make a measurement, then you influence the outcome. And so
Exactly.
that was a huge change.
Double slit type experiments
Right.
and things,
Yes,
observation
yes, yeah,
changes
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
actual
yeah, yeah,
experiment, way
yeah,
particles work. And
yeah.
that's such a fascinating thing. And
Hmm.
it's a tough bridge to cross there, but it is also people are very stuck in, say, the Newtonian type physics where they just don't accept that there might be something else outside of our experience. Like you said, like Descartes,
Yes,
going I
yeah.
think before I am. And for our
Right.
audience members
Hmm.
that don't know, that's his famous quote, right?
Yeah,
Um, talking about the
and
intersection.
yeah, and he thought that we are a subject, and we are thinking, and we are aware, and we are alive, and we are looking at objects, and they are not thinking, and they are not aware, they're not alive. So it's a split between us as a subject and them as an object. So when we look at metals in chemistry, we see that iron is a dead mineral. For an alchemist, they were participating in the mineral and they were communicating subject to subject. So they were talking with the metals, they were communicating with the metals. So it was a communication with the world. And that makes the world very different, because as long as you see the world as an object, then you can burn the rainforests, and then you can take everything out of the earth, and then you can burn CO2 and methane, create methane as much as you want, because the world is an object, it's not alive. But if you go back to the alchemical notion that we participate in this world, and that we are part of this world, then everything becomes much more precious. The world becomes more precious. The world stops being a thing, and the world becomes a being, an entity that we communicate with, that we are part of. And so it's very different. So we're moving also in a way back to this alchemical notion that we are participating in everything that we study and everything that we act upon.
Which I think is wonderful. You know, the indigenous cultures believed in the forms of animism where everything has
Yes,
a consciousness and a
Hmm.
soul, more of a
yes,
soul and a spirit, meaning the wind and all that stuff.
yeah,
And
yes,
we talk about panpsychism a lot
Hmm.
because we think that's, you know, just the next step of that, where
hmm
things, inert matter can hold a consciousness, and that there's
yeah. Well,
maybe level of
that's pure alchemy. That is
yeah.
pure alchemy. That's what alchemists are talking about. Exactly that. And
And
so this was Aboriginal Western consciousness.
hmm,
And so every consciousness has its own aboriginality, and the aboriginality of Western consciousness is in this alchemical notion that we are participating in the world in everything that we do.
All right. So your basic message there really is to appreciate the earth and
Yes.
you
I know
know,
what Anne's
Yes.
yeah, that well, a lot of
the trees alone.
our audience likes that as well. Yeah, we talk
Yes.
about the trees and how they talk to each other and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was with an Aboriginal man. I spent a lot of my life in Australia. My wife is Australian, so I spent half the time in Australia. And I was with an Aboriginal man, and we were walking, and he was pointing to a group of trees, and he said, "That fella is walking over there because there's water over there. So that fella is walking over there, and these fellas are following him over there." So he sees the bunch of trees as an entity that is all connected, that is moving towards the water. So they're just moving very slowly. And you have to see them as moving very slowly, but they're moving to the water. And so they are alive there, and he calls them fellas and people, and they're a mob. They're a mob of trees, and it made complete sense when he was telling me that.
It does make sense. Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I like
We'll
that.
have to have seen it too.
I had a note here too that you talk about Asclepius. I hope I'm not Asclepius. I'm not
Yeah,
butchering
Asclepius.
that
Yes,
name.
Asclepius.
It's a
Yeah.
form of medicine. Yeah.
Asclepius was the god of medicine. What happened was in about 1300 BC, there was a legendary physician, legendary physician who is a legendary physician who later became a demigod, and then he became a god, and he became the god of medicine. And I think that the last of the great Asclepian physicians was called Hippocrates, and many of you must have heard of Hippocrates. Hippocrates, the physicians make still their oath: "I shall not harm, do no harm," is the Hippocratic oath.
Right.
Hippocrates was an Asclepian physician, and in my career, we opened up healing sanctuaries that were based on the Asclepian tradition. And the Asclepian tradition, the earliest tradition of Western medicine, was based on dreaming. And dreaming is actually my day job. That's my specialty. And I've worked with about 45,000 dreams. And so dreaming was seen as the center part of medicine, that through dreaming you could create healing in the body. It was not healing in the mind, it was healing of the body. And so we started sanctuaries here in Santa Barbara and in Mexico, sanctuaries to help people who have physical illness deal with their physical illness through dreaming. So I think dreaming is a very important part of this. And there's, of course, a lot of relationship between dreaming and alchemy, because an alchemist is involved with the dreams of matter. And just somebody said in the text that nature is pissed. The moment that you see nature as pissed, you see nature as a living being that is fully a dream with anger. And that dreaming of the anger, you can have it in your dreams, or you can see it in nature, or you can see it in the metals. The dream of anger and rage would be very much involved with iron and Mars. And so, yeah, all these things are connected.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. Now, I know you're a Jungian psychoanalyst for over 40 years, and your bio is quite extensive. You're a past president of the International Association for the Study of Dreams and founder of the Santa Barbara Healing Sanctuary that you just mentioned. So dreams are a fascinating subject for us as well. Do you see dreams differently than the average person, and how they work?
I have to say something about the way that I approach the world, and it is called, in a very expensive word, I'm a phenomenologist. So I do the study of phenomenon is the experience of reality. So I'm interested in experience. From an experiential perspective, dreams are real. We have real experiences. We forget them, most of them, but we have real experiences, real encounters with a world that is fully embodied. And that's why the technique and the method that I've developed is called embodied imagination. It is working in the way that imagination constantly presents itself as fully embodied. If you have a dream that you're sitting in front of a computer and you are listening to Bigfoot and Bunny, in that dream, your computer is real, your desk is real, the chair that you sit in is real. These are real experiences, and maybe you wake up and you forget about them, which would be a pity because you don't want to forget about Bigfoot and Bunny. But you are in a real experience. So that's how I see dreams, as real experience of a particular kind of reality.
I 100% agree with you. And it's something that we've talked about on the show, just the way your mind perceives things. Unless you're having like a lucid dream or an out of body experience where you're aware you're dreaming,
right,
for all intents and purposes, your brain is just having the same experience that it has when it's awake. You believe everything around you is real. It is real. So do you find that like people have things like post-traumatic stress disorder from nightmares, or can they be really affected by their dreams?
Oh, people are very affected by their dreams. I think that that's a chicken and the egg question, right? Do you get traumatic dreams because you have experienced trauma, or are you traumatized by traumatic dreams? Chicken and egg, you don't know. But there are very traumatic dreams, but I find working with traumatic dreams to be very helpful in working, if you can work with dreams, are very helpful to work with people who have, for instance, PTSD, because dreams is already a form of the way that your soul is digesting these experiences. So you are already in a process of digestion as you dream about them. There are different kinds of dreams. There is a dream that repeats exactly what happened, and our psychological ancestor Freud called that a repetition compulsion, but that's not the usual dream. The usual dream is that you experience a trauma and the trauma already begins to change in the dream. It becomes a different kind of trauma. And so that's very similar to alchemy. There is a desire in the soul to transmute these very difficult, poisonous things into something manageable. And by working on the dream and traumatic dreams, you begin to manage these kind of post-traumatic effects.
Fascinating. And I just want to give a quick shout out to some of the folks in our audience are chatting away. Emery Young, thank you for your comments that we used on the screen. Rosie Page also mentions dreams. Hey, Rosie, good to see you. Linda Judge, good to see you. Greg Koss, as always, and everyone else that's out there.
Courtney Peterson.
Courtney Peterson, of course,
yes,
of our Paranormal United Network. Wanted to ask you about what your thoughts were on old Hag Syndrome. I've had this experience. There's a lot of history behind it. When I experienced it personally, I didn't know what it was, at least not on a conscious level. I don't know if maybe
Can you describe it?
Well, I saw the crone and I was scared to death. I was having a lucid dream. I was aware I was dreaming and I was trying to wake up and I felt like I was drowning. I saw the stereotypical crone, old hag, and she scared the living crap out of me.
She's trying to drown you.
Yeah, right. And that is how.
And he had no idea that was the actual thing.
Years later, I would read about old hag syndrome, and that's common. And she's usually sitting on your chest and that kind of thing. But I had this feeling of suffocation, and I was trying to wake up and could become conscious again, and it was difficult. It was very scary. What is your perspective on old hag syndrome?
Well, it is the classical description of nightmare. Nightmare is the nightmare was somebody that was sitting on your chest so you couldn't breathe. I think that it has something to do with uh, the fear of nature, the fear of something that is magical, the fear of something that we cannot explain, the fear of that's for this same reason that you have this old Hag syndrome. People burned witches for generations because somehow this is frequently seen as women being these frightening characters that begin to attack you. It is seen these kind of old hags are seen the world over. Like in Russia, it would be Baba Yaga,
Mhm.
and you see them everywhere. In African cultures, you see these very frightening women. In the no play in Japan, there are these very frightening characters. They seem to happen the world over. And so they seem to be about something about the the frightening mother, the mother that is, because we are all born from mother, so she is magical. She is a magical being,
Hmm.
and this magical being has a positive side, but also a very frightening negative side. That it comes up sometimes in the notion of which is called the vagina dentata, the vagina with teeth that bites you, that wants
Oh
to
yeah,
eat you,
I
it
made
wants to get you back.
a good harem
And
with
so,
pretty
yeah,
sure.
it's a very frightening when
Yeah.
people have that dream. So, in psychology, frequently we talk about it as the negative mother or the frightening mother, or so that's how I would
Do
look
you
at
think
it.
the crone and like as in Baba Yaga and all that is an archetype and that it lives in a maybe in our subconscious, almost
Um,
with a power of
it
its own?
it has a power of its own. There are many. See, there has been this discussion, and that was a discussion that happened between Freud and Jung, where Freud would say that in our imagination, the word unconscious basically means I don't know. So I'd rather use the word imagination. So in our imagination, Freud said it all comes from our daily life. And Jung says, no, it does not all come from our daily life. The imagination is already populated as we're born. We are born with imagination. And so these kind of forces exist in a world of imagination, and that would be the perspective that Jung would follow. You would call them therefore archetypal. And so they are prototypes, but prototypes that exist the world over. So there are archaic prototypes, and these archaic prototypes exist more or less everywhere, but each culture has their own manifestation of it. So each culture is culture specific in its manifestation. So if you have, for instance, the frightening female would be different in Japan than she would be in locations in Africa, or she would be in Aboriginal Australia. The frightening female exists as a character, but each culture interprets them differently. So that would be the archetypal aspect and the difference between Freud and Jung, and why I followed Jung, because I think the imagination is already populated before we have any experience.
That's a really interesting way to
Interesting.
put it. I love that. And
How about the man, like a shadow person? Like, sorry.
Of men, yes.
Yes. Would that
Um,
be the
well,
same?
it would be the sorcerer. It would be the like in the Lord of the Rings, it would be Mordor,
Okay.
and it would be the evil magician. Uh, and it's interesting. It is not as prevalent as the feared female, although it's completely prevalent. But in the Middle Ages, there was a saying of there's one wizard for every 10 witches. So that the females are seen to be more often that embodiment, and I think that it has something to do with the fear of female, the fear of mother, the fear of the great creation, because we're all brought up by mother, and mother is therefore the most powerful figure in our world, and therefore the shadow of that is also the most frightening, because there's nothing more powerful than mother in the beginning. That's how we start.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. It's a good point, Kristen. You know, we talk about in the paranormal realm, of which we're part of, and a lot of our audience is shadow people. It's something that people often witness, and Kristen has seen, and we've both seen shadows, which she had a pretty traumatic experience with them when she was young. But it's a common thing in the paranormal. These reported shadow people, ones with the hats and the hat man.
I had one hold me down one time.
And
it wasn't.
And are they male or female? What kind of people are they?
And feels male. So one time one had a hat, other times they didn't.
But the concept of the shadow self played into the shadow people that are seen. That's a fascinating subject that I don't think is brought up.
What the way that I work with that. So say that Kristen, that you would be working with me as your dream worker, as your analyst. What I would do is if you would be open to it at that moment, and if there's enough of a trust relationship between us, I would help you not just feel these characters coming at you, but also begin to feel their identity, begin to identify with them, and begin to experience it from their perspective. That is very much the way that I work. I shift perspective. I shift perspective out of your habitual consciousness, which is that you're overwhelmed by these shadow characters, and I help you get into the perspective of these shadow characters.
Okay, thank you. I'm not ready yet.
No. Most people aren't. But
I'm scared
that's the way.
Negative feeling every single time. And like I said, it wasn't sleep paralysis either. I've gotten held down by one. I was moving and I was screaming. And I never sleep like this. My hands in the back of my head. But I could feel them. I swear I was pushed down the stairs when I was a kid by one as well. So
yeah. So but if you if you would go the next step, then you would begin to experience it from their demonic perspective. They're also called demons, right? And so and then you can begin to sense their force and their power, and then they will stop being demons, but they become other kinds of entities. But anyway.
Wow, well, that's fascinating. Yes. We may circle back on that, because that's a whole show right there. I like that, where you're going with that. I did want to make the comment before about you saying the imagination is more or less populated upon birth, and do you think that is because there is a subconscious link to the human design that picks up on all these things that are going around in the world that may explain some of these archetypes that Jung used to talk about, and we mentioned it with the crone?
I think that I don't know where these beings come from. I just noticed that they exist. And I noticed that people experience them. And I noticed that these kind of shadow people in Iceland, they would be called the little people. They're called different in different places. Sure. Sometimes they're called leprechauns or fairies, or
fairies.
And so
this was no fairy.
Rumpelstiltskin. Rumpelstiltskin is one of the examples of that. And they're very frightening beings. Where they come from, I don't know. I don't know if they come from the brain, because when the moments we say that they come from the brain, we are in Western kind of materialism, that everything comes from the brain.
Right.
That is one opinion. I don't know. I just stay with the experience, and I see that people experience these kind of characters everywhere, and you can see patterns in them that come up in many different places. So as an experience, I can see it happening everywhere. Where these experiences come from, I really don't know.
Fascinating. Very
Yeah.
similar to like alien abduction phenomena.
Yes, well, I indeed, but what in the 80s and the 90s, a friend of mine, his name was John Mack.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, he was because I was in Cambridge. He was at Harvard, and he started to send me people who he was working with, who had been abducted, and to ask me, because my specialty is dreaming, could I find any difference in their experience and the dream experience? So I worked with a few of them, and I couldn't find a difference because the experience was entirely real. That's all I could establish. The experience was entirely real, but I don't know what that reality was referring to. I don't know if this reality was a physical reality or whatever. The experience is an entirely real experience. That's all I could say to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he did is he went with a group to speak with the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, and the Dalai Lama said, for us, it's not a problem because we have spirits that momentarily materialize and then they dematerialize. In Western culture, we only have notions of spirit that are either material, or the entities that are either material or they're non-material. In Tibetan culture, they have beings that are material and then they dematerialize and they rematerialize. So it depends what culture you're in to see what these beings are, whether they are people from spaceships or whatever they are. All I could establish is that when I was working with abduction experiences, they were similar to working with dreams in a deep way.
That is really fascinating. And we do love the work of John Mack. So
Yes.
I didn't realize you knew
He
him.
was great. He was so daring. He was such a he had won a Pulitzer Prize, and he had a huge reputation. And then he started to work on these alien abductions, and he started the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research at Harvard. And I was sideways involved with that. And uh, he put his whole reputation at stake. He
That's right.
said, we should research this, we should investigate this, because either something's happening physically or there's an epidemic going on. From either side, we should look at this. And thank God he had tenure, so they couldn't fire him at Harvard.
I
But they
tried.
were very embarrassed by him. No, they couldn't, because he had tenure. And so it's yeah, he was a very courageous man. It's a great loss.
Very, yeah, for being in his position to come out. And his
Hmm.
work, I've listened to his lectures with like Bud Hopkins and
Yeah.
Hmm.
some other people. It's just
So,
really
Yeah,
fascinating stuff.
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
I recommend people look into that if you're not familiar and you're interested in alien
yeah.
abductions. Now, we've talked to abductees on our show, like Terry Lovelace, among others. It is a fascinating thing because it seems to follow them through their life. We see that pattern a lot. It's not exclusively this, but like Terry's a good example where he had experiences when he was young as a child, and they never have really left him. And he had this like big abduction experience in the middle of all that
Yeah.
at Devil's Den. But he also talked about things of like just riding a bike and
Missing a whole bunch
missing
of
time, and he just 6
Yeah.
hours later, he'd be
Didn't
in the
even know where
ditch
he
somewhere
is.
with the
Yep.
bike. And
Right.
that makes you wonder, like, where does the brain go? Because you can daydream when you're driving and that kind of thing. And it's kind of relates to that dream experience. People
Hmm.
with a lot of these paranormal shadow people experiences, also alien abductions. A lot of times they're in that in-between state. I forget the word
Yeah.
for hypnosis, where you're
No,
just
it's called hypnagogic. It's the
hypnagogic. Thank you.
hypnagogic state. And so all the work that I do is in the hypnagogic state. So I help people back into that state, into that hypnagogic state, and I help them to flash back into their dreams or into their memories. And in that flashback, these dreams or memories come back to life, and so you can experience it again. And that's my way of working. So I always work in this hypnagogic state. Yes, the problem of lost time is a very interesting problem, and I see it as a very important experience, and I am very interested in what these people experience.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned this before, so some of our friends will know, but the first reported UFO sighting in the United States by the colonists, not the indigenous people, was these gentlemen in a boat near the Charles River, rowing down a stream, and they look in the sky and they see, they didn't know how to describe it. They described it as a flaming pig, right? And they're not at a Pink Floyd concert. This is like back in the 1600s. It was Mass Bay
I don't
colonies.
think there was mushrooms about the
We weren't even our own country at that point here in the U.S.
right.
But they had a time-lapse experience and ended up way down the river hours later. There was 3 or 4 of them on the boat. None of them had any idea how they got there.
Yeah. So yeah, that experience. So I'm interested in that as an experience. I don't know what it is and what it refers to, but as an experience, that is totally fascinating. And if we don't study that, then we're crazy because it's such important experience, and it says something about human capabilities, and it says something about um, who we are when we experience that. Yeah, what I would try and do is to see if I could help the person back into the experience.
Excellent. I'm just going to put up a few comments from our audience.
We have questions.
Irene Takura, who is from Japan, says men were the only ones who would be called a doctor, and she's talking about her culture, but use the same medicine as witches. And then said now women are the leader and they're stronger than men, and men hands all the money too. Right? Interesting point there.
Trucks and all.
Let's see. Yeah, trucks, right? Yeah, Kristen's driving my truck. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna.
Linda Judd had a really good one.
Whole bunch of comments out here. Sorry. Let's see. Linda Judd is one of them. Said this seems to relate to lower vibration, not being able to communicate with higher vibration. And I think Rosie said something about raising your vibration. Well, what do you think about that? Do you people talk about their vibrational or emotional states and raising them? Is that something we're trying to achieve and get to the golden alchemy?
Yeah, no, I think that your respondents were absolutely right. One of the goals of alchemy is to become increasingly subtle, and that is in the language that your respondents are using. That is getting to a higher vibration. So because higher vibrations are in their way more subtle, so we're moving from AM to FM, and so. As we are doing that, we thereby, as we get into this more fluid state, into this what they call higher vibration, what I call greater subtlety, the alchemists call it the subtle body. As we get more into the subtle body, we can penetrate deeper into the world, because the alchemists say the world is like a skin, it has pores, and if you get subtle enough, you can get through the pores. If you're very raw and hard, you will just get into resistance. People will push you back. But if you're subtle enough, you can get in through the pores of the world and begin to affect the world in this very subtle way. And that's what the alchemists were trying to do. So it's very similar to what they're saying, higher vibration.
Almost like adjust your filter. Now, the healing work you do in these hypnagogic states, do you do this through hypnosis? How do you approach that, working with somebody in dreams?
Yeah, what you do is you begin to, for instance, you have a dream of a person who is chased by a dog. You begin to say, where are you? Can you describe the street around you? What is the light like? How are you moving? How you feel in your body? And as you do that, you begin to get a sense of body. And as you begin to get a sense of body, the environment begins to reestablish itself around you. So you're in a three-dimensional space. You're beginning to be in a dreaming environment. And then you begin to notice the dog behind you, and you begin to experience your fear. And the more you experience your fear, then you, the deeper you get into your body, and the deeper you get into the hypnagogic state. And then you can make the switch to the dog behind you and begin to, what I was talking about with Kristen, then you begin to sense the movement of the dog and the jaws of the dog and the dog wanting to bite and all that kind of stuff. You begin to sense that in the dog, and then you are able to feel both your fear of running away and the aggression of the dog at the same time, and that creates a change in your body.
And the way you react to the dog.
A
The
reactive
way
change.
you react, the way you react to the dog, and the way the dog acts upon you, so that you can feel the rage of the dog, you can feel the attack of the dog, but not just from the perspective of the victim. You can see it from the perspective of the aggressor, the dog. And so it very much helps to move people out of their victim perspective, because lots of people have moved into a victim perspective. And I think that that victim perspective is in itself not very useful all the time. I
Sure.
think that have to get back into agency. And so if we can begin to move into perspectives that threaten us, but if we can move into it from their perspective, then we gain that agency. So I'm very much after helping people move from a victim perspective to agency.
That's fascinating. So I love that you believe the dog is real, right? So the shadow
The
person is
dog is real, yeah,
real.
absolutely
The
real.
dog is
Of
real for
course,
all intents and purposes, and our
while she's there,
real.
running in the street, the dog is very real. Otherwise, she
Mhm.
wouldn't be running like that.
Right. And to that the dog could be affected, this archetypical creature. I like how we're putting this and where we're going with some of that direction may exist maybe in a collective unconscious and be a being of its own, like a thinking being,
I
or do you
don't
think
know.
it's really a projection of
I have no
our own
idea.
mind?
Everything when you start with certain premises, you will get to certain outcomes. If you have the premise that we are the thinking ones, and therefore uh, these beings would be the projections of our thoughts. If you go from that we are participating in a world of imagination that is real by itself, then they are realities unto themselves. If you believe that they are that there's a world of aliens out there, then this could be a manifestation of an alien. If you believe that these are ancestors, then this is a spirit ancestor. You can go anywhere with it. So I have no idea. I don't know who they are. I don't know where they come from. I only know that they are, and I only know that they are presenting themselves as entirely real, and therefore I take them as at face value, and I take them as real. But I also know that we don't just have to be at their mercy. We can begin to experience their perspective and thereby gain an enormous amount of power and agency.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it reminds me, we were having a conversation on Thursday about tulpas and
Mhm.
egregores as well, which is something like a chaos magician will put together, or sorcerer, and put intent and energy in something that seems to take on a life of its own. And it's like, well, is that a projection? We don't really know the answers, but we do know it can
We
do
don't
stuff,
know.
and will continue to do stuff until you stop it, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a couple questions here. Rosie asked, what happens if you're awake and slip into a hypnagogic state?
Um, it depends if you slip into it voluntarily or involuntarily. If you slip into it involuntarily, you usually end up falling asleep. If you slip into it voluntarily, you can stay in that hypnagogic state and begin to experience the world from that hypnagogic state. So you're then between waking and sleeping. And as you are between waking and sleeping, you can feel that world of imagination as an entirely real world. And at the same time, you can interact with it. So it depends whether it's voluntary or involuntary.
Excellent. Greg Koss says, that is unreal about the vibration. And do you think the vibration is the same as your energy?
Um, Energy is a word that has been used, overused. It has been used since very much since the 19th century. It's a very much 19th century notion, Maxwell and electricity, and then it came to its culmination in the relativity theory. So there we find that everything is matter, and since everything that everything is energy, and therefore I find the word energy very hard to use because it has no quality. Because everything is energy, therefore it has no quality. I think that these vibrations, and the same as if you talk in vibration language, each vibration has a quality. Um, if you have a tone is a vibration, and
Mhm.
each tone has its own quality. So I always think that these are qualities. These vibrations by themselves are qualities. So they're not just quantitative as energy, and therefore I find the use of the word energy difficult, but lots of people are using it all the time. And then but therefore I don't know if vibration is the same as energy. If you would look at it scientifically, then vibration is the way that energy moves. So that's all I can say.
Okay.
No, that's
Thank you.
fascinating. Now, I think you mentioned in your bio about embodied imagination and some similarities with magic. And we've
Yes.
touched on some of this, but could you expound on that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Well, the notion of embodied imagination is that you can connect to this, for all intents and purposes, other world. Um, and this other world, like the world of dreaming, that is clearly not physical, right? You wake up from a dream, so it's not physical. I therefore call it quasi-physical. So these connections to the quasi-physical world are very strong. And can you repeat the question that you asked, because I'm going into, I saw a thing about a rabbit hole and I went right
Oh,
into the
sorry.
rabbit
I
And then
just
hole.
you
try
went
to
into
So
one.
share some of our
I
comments
went into one, yeah.
we go. It was about embodied imagination
Oh
and
yeah,
magic.
okay, yeah.
It's a
And
similarity.
so what embodied imagination does is it makes the connection to this other world. It makes the connection to the dream world. It makes the connection to this imagination as a physical, in a physical way. You can feel it with your body. Magic is doing the same thing, but it does it to influence the physical world. It tries to thereby change the world that we're in. I am interested in establishing a relationship. So my work of embodied imagination is relational, setting up a relationship between ourselves and this other world. And magic is to use this other world to therefore um, gain power over this world. And so therefore, I'm not doing magic. I'm not interested in gaining power. I'm interested in gaining agency, but I'm not interested in gaining power over this world. I am interested in being with these beings, because as we are communicating together, this world and the other world, as we are communicating with this quasi-physical world, there's change that happens. There's transformation that begins to happen. We become more refined. The world we're in becomes more refined, and it will spread further into the world. We get more agency.
It's excellent. I like your approach. I mean, what we're talking about on say in the paranormal world, this would almost be like a cleansing, but what you're having the person do is come to grips with the reality of that dream state and
Right,
uh, disempowering the being that they may be
right.
haunted by. And do you
Yeah.
have a lot of cases like that where people feel like they're haunted by some sort of negative entity, be it a demon or
Oh, yeah.
their great
Yeah.
great grandfather or something?
Yeah. And so what I do is the way that I'm describing it is they frequently come up in dreams, and I would eventually help the person to move into the perspective of the one that is threatening them, and thereby feel what it is like from that perspective. And frequently, what happens is an enormous influx of energy and a widening of consciousness. And so yeah, that's how I would
Widening
treat
of
them.
consciousness. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
different.
Yeah,
Just
my teacher, his name was James Hillman, one of the leading Jungian analysts. He's no longer with us. He would call that soul making.
Wow, very cool.
I'm writing that down.
What about indigenous cultures and their magic? Or are we going back more to uh, the sense of consciousness being and everything and animism?
Intentions and yeah.
I well, I was in the outback in Australia with an Aboriginal medicine man, and so what he does is he becomes an eagle, and he goes and dives down and takes the patient on his back, and he flies with the patients on his back to the center of the galaxy, and then he falls on some kind of sticks that stick out that penetrate both him and his patient. And then he flies back with the patient on his back. He has to be very careful that he doesn't start to move around like a drunken driver. So he has to be really careful. And then he comes back and he puts the patient back down. And that's how the healing process goes. So all I can do when I ask him is that in a dream state, he says, no, 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 it has nothing to do with dreams. So for him, it is an entirely real experience of becoming an eagle. And I've spoken with other Aboriginal medicine men. They had similar experiences. It's something that is alien to me, but I can see that it's an absolutely real experience. And so I think that shamanism is real experiences, and within the culture it works, because I do think that within the culture, these people that he's healing in this way do get healed at times, in the same way that our doctors heal at times. So so I think it has enormous power that they become entirely embodied by these what I call imaginal forces, like an eagle, and get all that energy and can transform that energy plus the energy of the ancestors that live in the center of the galaxy. So the ancestral energy and the eagle energy come together in the patient and thereby begin to trigger enormous experiences in the patient, which we know to be valid because all the stuff about placebo research shows that the imagination has enormous influence on the body. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Wow.
No, that's a
That's
very good answer. And I think those cultures would have taken those dreams a lot more seriously in their waking state than like,
Yes, yes.
you know,
Yeah,
modern
when you go
kind of
and
disregard a lot of
spend
stuff.
time, yeah, when you spend some time with Aboriginal people, which I had the privilege of doing, in the morning they start to yell at each other in their swags, and I ask what are they doing, and then a friend of mine who could speak Pitjantjara said, "Oh, they're telling each other the morning news. The morning news is their dreams."
Oh wow.
Oh, fascinating.
Mhm.
That's way
Yeah,
cool.
What they learned
yeah.
that night before.
Wow.
And when you speak of dreams of flying, that reminds me of out of body experiences. A common out of body experience is to be flying or lucid dream. And
Hmm.
how do you see those experiences?
Wonderful. Um,
We
and
agree.
so, yeah,
I like your
all right.
perspective on them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think that we uh, that flying experiences and the sense that we can fly preceded our building of airplanes. I think that there is a human desire to fly and a sense that we can fly, and in imagination we can fly. All that is so strong that eventually we started to build airplanes. Leonardo already was designing helicopters.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that there is a drive, a deep drive in the human soul to fly. There's there's a desire to soar, like the spirit likes to soar, and that desire to soar in dreams comes out as flying. But there is an innate desire that we have to soar.
And
Very good.
it seems to span centuries or millennia even.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Do you think when you're having an out-of-body experience, do you think that some portion of you is leaving the body and having that experience, or
I don't know.
not sure?
I just no, I just know that they are experiences that you feel that you're leaving your body. So that's as far as I can go. In the same way that an abduction experience is that you feel and you experience that you're being abducted by aliens. So I know that the experiences are real and that they are felt to be out of body experiences, and what they are, I have no idea.
Mhm.
See,
Right.
it's very easy for me because I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing.
Oh, I
And
think you know.
after
Yeah.
no, no, no. But after I'm very Socratic. Um, the only thing that I know more than many other people is that I know absolutely nothing.
Well, the more you get into a
And
subject, you start to realize you
yeah,
don't know
that
much, right?
absolutely, and especially dreams. My God,
Jeez, I can't.
is that
Yeah,
I
weird
can
stuff?
imagine.
most easy thing to prove or discern. Um,
Mhm,
Yeah.
what is shared dreaming's another experience people have, and they talk to each other and both remember the experiences of the
mhm.
dreams.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
what is going on with that? That's
How is that possible?
but it happens,
Mhm.
right? People have the experience.
People have that experience, and people verify it with each other. And there are at the International Association for the Study of Dreams, where I was for a while president. Um, there are groups of lucid dreamers that make appointments that when we get lucid, we move to a certain place and we meet there, and some say that they could actually do that. So I don't know what it is, but I just know that there is more under the sun than I understand.
Right, right. Linda Judd says, LOL. I say, lol. Having a bird's eye view of the world when flying in dreams gives me a sense of disorientation. It's uncomfortable for me. So I'm an old fuddy duddy. I take the bus. Well, that's
Hmm.
good. I've
Yeah,
had one. I
but
was riding a
yeah.
bicycle like ET or something, just
Hmm.
through the sky.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Now they have devices you can go and do this without dreaming. You
Oh,
can get in
jeez.
your I think they cost about $96,000. So they're a little expensive, but they're basically like a drone, single person man
Hmm.
drone. You can, I don't know if it's 20 minutes or half hours you charge, but you can fly over houses, fly around, 20, 40 feet in the air. Looks like a lot of fun.
It's a millionaire's toy.
Hmm. Yes.
Yes, yes. We're waiting. That's going to be a lottery buy right there. That's what we'll put that on the lottery list.
No, I don't want
Kristen.
that.
Oh, I want that
You
thing.
can have it.
I
Hmm.
definitely want to play on that. But no, that's fascinating. Now I know you also talk about an apocalyptic imagination, and
Yes.
with some
Just as a thought, are we going for 2 hours? What are we doing?
we go to 6 o'clock, but we can wrap up if you're busy. We can wrap up anytime you
Yes.
like. So
Well, in about 20 minutes, I would like to.
no problem.
Um,
No problem. You got it.
okay, good. Yeah.
We'll just touch on this if you like.
So the apocalyptic imagination is uh, the apocalyptic imagination is the sense that a new world is being revealed. And in order for the new world to come into being, the old world has to come to an end. And the sense of the old world having to come to an end is seen as doom. And so the apocalyptic imagination is very strong in political issues. When I started, I organized several conferences called Facing Apocalypse, which was how this apocalyptic imagination of doom, of the end of the world, was coming up in different issues. So first we studied how it would come up in the nuclear issue and the notion of nuclear winter, and that the world would come to an end through kind of Dr. Strangelove. And then we studied how in 1990 we did a conference about how it exists in the environmental climate crisis. That was already 30 years ago. And and then we worked on how apocalyptic imagination happens in the images of holy war, because holy war, end of the world, these are all things that have to do with apocalypse. And I was interested how the notion of apocalypse is that it's very much related to the notion of millennium. And so I was postulating that uh, with the approach of the millennium, with the year 2000, with the approach of the millennium, and around the millennium, these apocalyptic fantasies would get stronger and stronger, the end of the world fantasies. And my worry now is that the apocalyptic imagination is digging very deep into the environmental crisis that we're going through. People think that the world is coming to an end and that we only have 5 years to correct it, 10 years to correct it. That's what people thought about the nuclear issue, that the nuclear clock was on a constant basis about 5 minutes to midnight. At midnight, everything would explode, so we would be 5 minutes to midnight was the nuclear clock. You cannot keep on staying in that state of alarm. We have to, because you burn out. We
Mhm.
have to realize that we are absolutely in climate crisis. There is no doubt that we are in climate crisis. There is no doubt that the insect population in Germany, the insects are dying by rates of 70%, and then the birds will be dying. It's happening. But if we put it in the context of apocalyptic imagination and doom and end of the world, we cannot sustain the generations that it will take to recover the earth in the way it needs to be recovered. It's going to take generations. And if we say that the world is going to come to an end, I don't think we'll have the stamina. This is going to take a lot of stamina for our children, for us, for our children, for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren to deal with climate crisis. And if you say that it's going to, if we don't do anything in everything in a few years, you cannot do that. You cannot keep that up. So that's why I'm worried about the apocalyptic imagination becoming part of the climate crisis that we're in.
100% agree with you
Yes.
about climate crisis. We're on the same page, but
Yes.
are you saying that there's a better way to communicate it to people than to say, hey, the world's ending? I mean, is there any bigger motivator than to know, like, your oceanfront property has gone bye-bye in
Yeah.
10 years or whatever, maybe sooner?
Yes, you can say that that's not the end of the world. I mean, somebody's ocean property, they will just lose a few $1,000,000, but that's not, and that there will be islands that will come that will be underwater, which is terrible.
Mhm.
Sure.
That I have more feeling about than about people's ocean property. Um,
It's a
but
good example. Yes.
yeah, but so there will be huge changes that are going to happen. We don't know what they exactly are going to be because all the models that we're making are inadequate. We cannot model this. And somebody says, stop cutting trees. Yes.
Yes, that's Anne-Marie Young.
Yeah. Um, I think that that would be one way, but you have to realize that we are burning up, not burning up, we are polluting the
Mm.
world every 3 days in the amount that the earth itself can digest in a year. So every 3 days we put forth the amount of pollution that we do in a year, that the earth can digest in a year. So it's going to go on. And how do we deal with it? How do we contain it? It's a matter for the long term, but there's going to be crises. So that's why it's important to realize that we are in climate crisis and that this climate crisis needs to be addressed, but needs to be addressed in the long term, and that we are going to be dealing with this in the long term. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's true.
Yeah, we agree with you, and there's a lot of reasons for it, of course. It's a deep subject in and of itself, natural.
Hmm.
But I'll just say, during the pandemic, the one thing I like seeing, and it may be the only one, was that the smog was clearing
Yeah.
up. Like
Hmm.
over Europe and stuff, with all the factories shut down, and uh,
Hmm.
animals seemed to be making a comeback, and there was some kind of good things there where you could get a glimpse of,
In certain places,
like,
though. Other
yeah,
places, like you were saying,
things
Germany.
could really be different.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, hopefully we get there. I don't know how to communicate it to everybody without a fear factor, because it's just such horrible news. But hopefully,
Well, yes, we have to realize that it is bad news. But we also have to realize that we have to deal with it in the same way as brushing our teeth. We have to do it as the normal thing, that we are aware of climate crisis and that we need to change the climate crisis and we need to do things that are better for the world. But we need to do that the way you every day clean your teeth. It has to become part of our everyday ritual.
And not a lot of people are going to follow that because most people are sheep. They have to get up, go to work. They don't care. So we need to get it out
they're
there.
overwhelmed, with that life and trying to
We
stay
all need to
afloat.
work together. And
I think that's a lot of the problem here in the United States. People are kept so busy that they don't really have time to think about some of these things
sucks too.
or give it some kind of thought, as there's just no
Mhm.
time. They're just trying to get through their day, pay their bills. And that it just seems like everything is, you're on
But
your
we
last
can
quadrant.
we can educate people in schools that this is a very dire crisis when you can still form minds which is not very long,
Mm.
that this is a crisis that they will have to deal with for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
That
right
becomes
there.
the
Start
norm.
with that.
Yeah,
And the generations coming up do seem to be more
yeah.
like-minded. My son is 15 and he seems to know a lot about it. And then
Yes, they are interested. They're interested
uh,
because that's the
talk.
world that that they're inhabiting, and
Mhm.
so that needs to be encouraged. That people like your son know more about it, and they will work more, and they become more alchemical in the sense that they are participants in the world. That as the world is in crisis, they are in crisis. We're all in crisis together, and we have to deal with this crisis
Right.
constantly.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap things up. I'd like to let people know how to get a hold of your books. Red Sulfur, the series, 4 different books, nonfiction, but I'm sorry, fictional book,
Fiction.
fictional story, but with a lot of nonfiction history about alchemy in them. And you have some other books as well. Where can they find them? Is it Amazon or should they
They're
come
all
to
they're all on Amazon, and then if people are interested in my lectures, they are on jungplatform.com, JUNG platform.com, one word. And they can find my lectures about alchemy there, and I have many, many lectures on alchemy in it. But I hope that people will go to my novels because that's the easiest access, and they're all based on an actual reported transmutation from lead into gold in 1666. That's where I began. That is actually historically reported, and I began to investigate that, and that's where the fiction started from.
That's excellent.
Great. Thank you
Well,
so
thank you so much
much.
for joining us. I know
It
we had a
was
couple of
awesome.
mishaps with our dates trying to get this together.
No, but good.
But
Yes.
we look forward to
I'm
talking
very
to you.
glad. It was very
Very
enjoyable.
All right.
Thank our
Well,
viewers,
and with
everybody in the audience. Thank you so much.
thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone.
And we'll see you on Thursday.
We will see you next Thursday. Thanks again, Robert. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.